Good evening and welcome back to Capital Time, a statewide look at politics. I'm Tim Boyle. State Superintendent June Atkinson recently introduced a plan that would significantly raise teacher pay in the state. But first, it would have to get through the General Assembly. So what do legislative leaders think of the plan, and will teachers and state employees see pay raises coming out of the short session this year? Joining us to discuss more on that, House Speaker Tim Moore. Speaker Moore, always a pleasure to have you in the studio. Good to see you.
Good to be with you, Tim.
So yesterday, you called June Atkinson's plan political. Did you mean that because she's running for office or because she's trying to put you guys into a corner?
You know, I think what we all have the same goal, which is to see teacher pay increased. But I think we need to be careful whenever we talk about raising the pay for one group of state employees and not doing the same for others. And so what I wanted to point out was, just throwing out a $540 million appropriation, which is huge in our budget, which would eat up any surplus that we had, plus we would have to come up with another $250 million to pay for. It has to be more politics than policy, because anyone who understands the numbers knows that you just can't do that unless you were to raise only that one group of employees and then raise taxes to do so. So I guess the safe political course was I could have said nothing, but I just felt like that was disingenuous. And I had a quote that wasn't prepared. It just came up when I said we should never play politics with people's paychecks, because people may start making plans about thinking how they're going to get paid and so forth.
But isn't teacher pay always politics, for better or for worse? I mean, you guys talk about it in House Republican caucus meetings, don't you? And it's impossible for it not to be.
There is, but I think the expectations need to be realistic of what the state can afford. And I think that the point I made earlier, we shouldn't just say raise just these employees' pay. We ought to try to do everything for all state employees, because things get more expensive for everyone. What I think we'd like to see, of course, in our budget last year, the House budget, we did a 2% across-the-board raise. I'd like to see us do more than that this year. I'm hoping we can get somewhere closer to maybe 3 or 4% if we can.
For teachers and state employees?
Yeah, if we can afford it. That's what I would like to see, but we have to get the numbers and see what we can afford to do. I think it's very critical. But, when it comes to education funding, we need to also make sure that we're funding the critical needs. I'm told right now by folks in education they're having trouble, particularly with the science, technology, engineering, and math, and that's where the highest turnover is occurring in terms of recruiting teachers. So we need to make sure we're doing something to get those teachers there. And when it comes to public education, it's a political issue, but for me it's very personal. I have 2 sons who are in the public schools, and I want the best for them and every other child in this state.
So a lot of this is philosophy, too. There's a lot of the teachers and Democrats believe in just across-the-board raises. A lot of Republicans believe in differentiated pay based on whether it's performance pay or whether it's specialty teachers. Do you think that's part of the issue here with the disagreement as well?
Well, frankly, I think a hybrid model is appropriate. I think there needs to be some across-the-board pay raise, because things get more expensive every year. And if you look back years ago, if you go back to 7 years before the Republicans were in charge, you had teachers and state employees being furloughed. The good thing is that since Republicans have taken over, and I hate to be partisan, but I'm just stating facts at this point, unemployment is down, taxes are lower, the huge deficit we had to the federal government, or the debt we had to the federal government of $2.5 billion is gone. We don't have deficits anymore. And instead of the furloughs and all those things that were occurring back when the Democrats were in charge, we've actually seen pay increases. Now, the complaint, Tim, has been that we haven't increased pay. That's been the complaint. But at least there have been increases. Last year, the ultimate budget had a $750 bonus. I frankly support and would have liked to have seen a percentage increase. As to your question about differentiated pay or performance-based pay, I think that's something that we should look at. I mean, every other sector of the economy does that. And so the key is, how do you do that? How do you do it in a fair way? And how do you come up with true benchmarks to measure performance? If I'm in a sales job, you can look and see how many things I sell in my job, and so I can be paid based on that. I will acknowledge, it is a little tougher to be able to show how are children learning, how are they improving, particularly when some of the critical needs may be in some of the more challenged schools, and where say test performance and those kinds of things may not be as robust in some of the other schools.
There's always a lot of talk about teacher pay rankings. We're in the 40s. We're, a top 10 population state. Where do you think North Carolina should be when it comes to teacher pay?
I think we should be as high as possible. The thing about education funding, and it's not just about teacher pay, it's overall education funding that's important. Whether it's K-12 and the universities for that matter. The universities are having challenges with faculty. We need to be mindful of that and deal with that as well. But that all ties in together with our state's economy. We have to have a trained, ready workforce, and that starts with a good education. And I've heard that from many business leaders across the state. So we're trying to, we're trying to deal with, whether it's alternatives, whether it's trying to be creative, those things we're doing that. But the other thing is we need to also show respect for those who enter the profession of education. It is a noble profession, and teachers give of their time, they give of their hearts and their minds to take care of students. I'm thankful for what I see every day.
It feels like we have this conversation every year, and part of it is amended every year. But is it possible to have sort of a long-term comprehensive plan so there isn't this uncertainty every single year?
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things that we've talked about is when it comes to whether it's teacher pay, state employee pay, tax policy, you name it, we shouldn't be dealing with one-time things. And what are we doing this year? We need a long-term systemic approach. The thing where these comments came up the other day actually came because there is a House Select Committee that is looking at these issues. The House is not afraid to take on these issues. We had superintendents from across the state that we invited in to come in and offer input and ideas. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? We had the public there. We wanted that dialogue going. So this whole thing about education funding, that's a dialogue that we in the House got started because we want to get input on it.
So what about the rest of the budget? I know you can't tell me what's going on behind the scenes necessarily, but what do you expect this year? I mean, it is an amendment year, it's an election year, so what are we expecting?
Well, of course, we have a surplus that has come in. It's not that much, but we do have a budget surplus, which shows, I think, that we're doing the right things. I believe we need to do several things. One, I believe there needs to be a pay increase this year for teachers and state employees.
I hope 3 to 4%.
We'll need to see what the final numbers show. That's what I would like to see, but that needs to happen. We need to also make sure that we can find a way to make sure the state health plan is financially sound. I do not want to see us do anything on the backs of workers to help with the state health plan. I think we also need to look if we can afford it in some targeted tax relief. One idea that we're talking about in the House is actually creating what's called a 0% bracket. We have what's called the standard deduction right now, which includes the first $15,000 in income. We're discussing if we can afford it to expand that maybe up to $16,000, $17,000 of income that paying any tax on it, and actually creating it formally a 0% tax bracket.
All right. We're almost out of time here, but I know this is a little bit out of left field, but do you plan on endorsing a presidential candidate before March 15th?
I'm just waiting and watching right now, but I am solidly endorsing the Carolina Panthers to win the Super Bowl.
Oh, that's an easy answer right there. Speaker Moore, thank you. It's always good to see you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right, time for one last break. When we turn, our advocates tackle the issues making news this week. We'll be right back.